Chapter 26, Lots of Guests. Haru, I don't know if I succeeded in turning Gabriel into a foodie, but she was happily enjoying a bowl of angel hair spaghetti across from Yasaka. I worried a bit about her getting sauce stains on her pristine white toga, but that worry proved unnecessary as nothing messy seemed to be able to stick to her or her clothes. I stood behind the counter in the kitchen, sharpening one of my favorite knives while Enri told me what happened while I was gone. Naruto came in, Enri said, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her apron. She was really upset. She said her friend Gara had been taken by a group called the Akatsuki. She asked for help, and Agner, he went with her. I set down the knife and looked at her. Agner went with Naruto. That's interesting. The Dragonborn versus a bunch of terrorist ninjas. I wondered how that was going to work out. Probably not well for them when Agner started using the voice. There really wasn't any way to defend against that unless you could also use the voice. I wanted to know what being hit with it felt like, and Agner used a shout called FUS Ro DAH on me exactly one time. Never again. I ended up getting sent flying over 50 feet and crashing into a stack of hay. Enri nodded quickly. He said something about never turning down an adventure. She paused, glancing down at the counter. And then Rias showed up. Oh. What did she want? I asked. She dragged Alice away. She said they were going to have something called a spa day. Alice didn't look like she had a choice and was dragged along by Rias, Enri said. She offered to take me too, but I didn't want to leave the foxhole empty. I couldn't help but laugh. A spa day, right after living through a zombie apocalypse. Maybe that was exactly what Alice needed in her life. I said thanks to Enri for sticking around, but next time I would have been fine with her going. The restaurant was warded to prevent anyone from stealing anything even if the place was empty. Enri smiled faintly but didn't say anything. I leaned on the counter, thinking it over. I wondered if I should go after Naruto and Aegoner and help them. But I did just get back from an adventure and couldn't keep running out of my restaurant at every opportunity. I figured they'd be fine. The door to the restaurant opened, and the scent of a werewolf hit me. It wasn't Ela, though. This scent was different. I turned toward the entrance just as Lupus Regina Beta walked. She wasn't someone I was expecting to see so soon, especially not without Ains with her. She had a playful smile on her face as she glanced around the restaurant. Hey there, everybody, Lupus Regina said. Her eyes landed on Gabriel, who was sitting with Yasaka at one of the tables. She stiffened slightly but kept moving toward the counter. Hello again, Haru-kun. That's a really powerful angel over there, Lupus Regina said, stopping in front of me. There was a hint of unease in her posture as she pointed toward Gabriel. It's nice to see you again, Lupus Regina Beta, I said with a smile. And don't worry. Gabriel is very nice. She probably won't smite you for being a werewolf, I said playfully. You can just call me Regina, she replied. I know my name's a mouthful. And I'd be grateful if she didn't. Gabriel gave us a small wave, but pretty much went back to talking with Yasaka about business between the yokai and heaven. Our territory had really been flourishing lately because of my restaurant. Fair enough, I said to Regina. Are you here for some food? Regina nodded enthusiastically. Uh-huh. And I came to get to know you better, Haru-kun. Lord Ains said I could visit whenever I want to. Isn't that great? It sure is. I said wistfully. I was having a lot of girls practically throwing themselves at me lately. I kind of wanted them to slow down a bit, which is why I didn't immediately jump into a relationship with Naruto. As for Shepard and I wasn't entirely sure what we could be classified as at this point. We were past friends with benefits since she made it clear she only wanted to sleep with me from now on, but she didn't go outright declaring me her boyfriend either. Was that term even still used in the future? Regina's grin turned mischievous. She leaned forward slightly and sniffed the air. You smell like another woman, Haru-kun. Did you just have sex? I coughed, completely caught off guard. She could smell that too. I took a shower on the Normandy. Did I need to take another one? Henry's expression darkened as she glared at Regina. That's not an appropriate question. Regina smirked at her. Relax, village girl. I was just teasing. Humph. Henry pouted and turned her head. She walked back over to Yasaka and Gabriel to refill their cups of tea. I was left alone with Regina. She grinned at me, showing off her sharp teeth, and asked what kind of meats I had on the menu. Anything but human, I said, giving her a flat look. She pouted in response. I've never eaten a human. I don't think, she said. My memories from Yggdrasil are a bit foggy. That caught my attention. Ains rarely talked about Yggdrasil, so I couldn't help but be curious. What do you remember about it? I asked. Regina shook her head. Not much. I never left the great tomb of Nazarick until we ended up in the New World. One thing I do remember, though, is that groups of strong people used to try to storm the tomb all the time to kill Lord Ains and the other supreme beings. She paused for a moment, her expression softening. Ains is the last one left, which is why we're all so protective of him. I didn't pry after that. The memory seemed like a sensitive topic. I couldn't blame her for being protective. I'd seen Albedo beat the hell out of anyone who even hinted at insulting Ains. She practically cleared half the dance floor at my last party when someone got too drunk and said the wrong thing. Good times. I slapped a few filet mignons onto a large cast iron pan, and the sizzling sound immediately caught Regina's attention. Her mouth opened slightly as she stared at the meat, and I swear she was salivating. Fresh meat, it smells so good, she said. Yeah, it does. My tails swayed happily behind me. Foxes were predators too. Meat was the best. I grabbed a couple of extra steaks and decided to make some for myself while I was at it. I made sure to keep the steaks well basted with butter as I seared the sides. The aroma filled the kitchen, rich and savory, and I sprinkled a little garlic, salt, and pepper over the sizzling meat. I was keeping things simple but tasty. Once both sides of the steaks were perfectly seared, I took them off the pan and stuck them into the oven to finish cooking. Huh. I didn't know there were so many steps to cooking steak, Regina said, watching me closely. It depends on the steak, I told her while setting a small timer. You've got to treat good meat with respect if you want the best flavor. Rushing it just ruins the whole thing. The timer dinged, and I pulled the steaks out of the oven. The smell was mouth-watering, and Regina's eyes widened as I plated the first one. I sliced into it to check the doneness, a perfect medium rare. I plated hers and then started on mine. Alright, tell me what you think, I said, sliding her plate across the counter. She didn't wait. She grabbed a fork and knife and cut into the steak. The first bite went into her mouth, and she froze for a second before her expression melted into pure delight. This is amazing, she said. How is this so good? I told you. Respect the meat. I said with a grin, taking a bite of my own steak. I had to admit, it turned out pretty damn good. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound being the occasional clink of silverware. While the two of us were eating, Yasaka and Gabriel slipped out, but they were soon quickly replaced by two more people, and a dog. Hey Haru. It's been a while. Harry said as he walked inside the restaurant. He was accompanied by a shabby-dressed wizard along with a large black dog. I would almost have thought the dog was a yokai in disguise, but I sensed no yuki from the animal. It was definitely magical though. There was an intelligence in its eyes, and it actually had more magical power than the poorly dressed wizard nearby. Ah, Pupu. Our date got interrupted. Regina said playfully. I was enjoying it being just you and me, she sounded sincere when she told me that. I was surprised I had made such a big impression on her the first time I met her. She wasn't even in the foxhole very long when she was purging it of any potential diseases after we fought off the Umbrella zombie army. I'm still here. Henry huffed, but Regina simply stuck her tongue out playfully at my waitress. Regina clearly had the type of personality that likes teasing people, and even I had to admit that Henry's reactions were too cute. I shook my head at their antics before turning to Harry and his guests. Welcome to the foxhole. How's school been, Harry? It's been pretty good since I won the first task, but I'm just waiting for something to happen at this point. Harry shrugged. That's how my luck always goes. Fair enough, I said before turning my attention to Harry's guests. It's nice to meet you, the shabby man said, but it felt like he didn't really mean it. I'm Remus Lupin. And I was a friend of Harry's father. I'm also a member of the Order of the Phoenix along with Sirius here. He pointed at the dog that barked at me. The Order of the Flaming Chicken? I asked playfully, and Harry chuckled. The dog standing next to Remus and Harry suddenly turned into an actual person. I couldn't help myself. I clapped my hands because that transformation was flawless. He might not have been a yokai, but even they would have been impressed by it. It's not the Order of the Flaming Chicken, the man said, scolding me. The Order of the Phoenix is a prestigious organization headed by the great Albus Dumbledore to battle all the evil in our world. Okay, I said in confusion. But isn't that the old man who tried to steal all of Harry's money and mind-controlled him for years? Harry glared towards Sirius. I thought we said you weren't going to cause a scene if I agreed to take you both here, Harry said, crossing his arms. Sirius shook his head. We just wanted to look out for you, pup. This place clearly hasn't been good for you, Harry, Remus added. You've been insulting your professors, tossing around forbidden lightning magic, and even consorting with vampires and other dark creatures. You know they're monsters, they're not to be trusted. I could see Regina stiffen at that. A low growl escaped her throat as she stepped forward, her amber eyes locked on Remus. That's rich, especially coming from a fellow werewolf, she said. She closed the distance between them and poked him in the chest. What's wrong with being a monster, huh? Remus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door to the restaurant opened again. Yes, what is wrong with being a monster? Serana walked in. Her piercing eyes scanned the room. She nodded at Harry. Hello, my apprentice, she greeted him before fixing her glare on the two men. Harry has talked about you too, Serana said. He said you were both great men, but I certainly don't see it. Sirius bristled at that comment. And who the bloody hell are you supposed to be? Serana, she said simply. A vampire, yes. And someone who's taught Harry more than you two ever have. That's not true, Remus said. I taught Harry the Patronus charm. Anne? Serana asked. Is that it? Because I taught him far more than one single spell that only works on a handful of your dimension's dark creatures. It can also be used to send messages, Remus grumbled. It can? Harry asked. Why didn't you tell me that? I could have been sending messages to Hermione, he said to Remus. Ha, the boy learns that the Patronus can send messages and immediately starts thinking about his girl. Just like his old man used to. Sirius said fondly before shaking his head and glaring at Serana. Listen here you, I don't want a vampire hanging around my godson any longer. I've been gone a couple months, but Dumbledore filled me in on everything I missed. Me too. Remus added. From what I knew of the situation, I was pretty sure neither of them had been told even a shred of the truth when it came to Harry. The boy looked pretty upset to hear them both say that's why they came back to visit him. At Dumbledore's orders. I'm kind of confused, Haru, Regina told me honestly. She was new to the restaurant after all. I chuckled and told her I'd fill her in about all this later. She gave Remus one last threatening glare before walking back over to the counter to finish her steak. Fake-ass werewolf. I bet he even still needs the full moon to transform. She grumbled to herself. I watched as Sirius and Remus kept arguing with Serana. They were completely ignoring the fact that Harry's magical skills now outclassed most of the wizarding world, especially in combat. It was like they were determined to discredit her no matter what. At some point, Sirius lost it and yelled something I couldn't believe. I bet you're just trying to seduce Harry for the gold in his vault. Sirius shouted. What? Harry shrieked. His face went red, but I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or rage. Probably both. Sirius was lucky Agner was still off in the ninja world. If he had been here, Sirius would have been in for a world of pain. Actually, considering the look on Serana's face, he still might be. She scowled and held up one of her hands. A bone-chilling cold spread across the room as frost began to form on the table nearest to her. Was she about to hit Sirius with an expert-level ice spell? Sirius and Remus both had their wands aimed at Serana, looking ready to duel. Please stop, mistress. They're not worth it, Harry said as he stepped in between the three of them. I'm really disappointed in you both. I told you what Dumbledore did to me. I sent you both letters, he said to Remus and Sirius. Remus shook his head at Harry. We know you did, Harry. But we know the truth. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. Dumbledore is a good man. He'd never use mind magic on you or try to do anything like stealing your gold. Harry scoffed at that. I don't even care about the gold anymore. All the gold in my vault is fake. All the gold in everyone's vaults is fake. I've been slowly emptying my vaults and converting it to Muggle currency so the goblins don't realize I'm onto their scam. What? Sirius and Remus said at the same time. Their faces went pale. I spoke up while nodding. It's true. I had multiple yokai test those goblin coins, and all of them proved galleons are fake gold. The wizarding world's gold has all been stolen by those little shits from under your noses. Serana crossed her arms and snorted. That's what you get for trusting disgusting creatures like goblins. In Skyrim, we kill them all on sight for a reso, Regina nodded. Goblins might be fellow monsters, but they're the lowest form of monsters. They'd never be allowed to set foot in Nazarick. I thought you were dumb before, being a werewolf and all, but you actually gave all your money to goblins? No wonder you look so poor. She smirked at Remus while giggling at his misfortune. I was pretty sure Remus's borderline homeless look had more to do with other factors, but honestly, I wasn't about to correct Regina. I didn't feel like defending a guy who stormed into my restaurant, didn't order anything, and immediately started acting like a dick. Now you're all filling the pup's head with even more lies. Sirius exclaimed and started waving his wand around. Harry is no longer coming back here ever again, and if any of you try to stop me, I'll show you why the Black family was so feared. He started threatening all of us and tried to reach out and grab Harry. Remus did the same, pointing his own stick at Serana and Regina. I scoffed. Wizards and their sticks. I was just about to summon some foxfire, but it looked like there was no need. Sparks! Harry shouted and a small burst of lightning shot out of his right and left hands. Sirius and Remus both collapsed on the ground and started convulsing as Harry filled their bodies with electricity. He kept shocking them until they passed out on the floor. Sorry about them, Harry said to me and everyone else. I thought they were visiting to congratulate me for killing a dragon, but it looks like Dumbledore sunk his old claws into them as well. Serana shook her head at Harry as she reached down and picked up both wands. She snapped them like twigs between her fingers. Don't apologize for the actions of others, my apprentice. Wow, your restaurant is fun, Haru-kun. Regina chuckled. We got dinner and a show. If that kid wasn't a human, I bet he'd be good friends with my sister Narbril Gamma. She loves throwing around lightning magic too. I simply hummed in response to Regina as I watched Harry cast a wandless levitation spell. He started moving Remus and Sirius's unconscious bodies toward an empty booth. Hopefully, they'd be more reasonable when they woke up. If not, I'd just ban them from the foxhole. I didn't want to do that unless I had to, though. They were Harry's only family, even if they were very gullible and stupid. The door to the restaurant opened, and I looked up to see Counselor Tevos saunter in. She looked tired, more so than usual. I was surprised to see her because she almost never came in around dinner time. "Hello, everyone," the counselor said as she made her way to an empty booth. She gave the two unconscious men no more than a passing glance before sitting down. I smiled at the blue-skinned woman, and Henry hurried over to take her order. "I should probably head back now," Regina said with a small pout. "I can come by again, right?" "Of course you can, Regina." "Say hi to Ains for me," I replied. Regina headed for the door but jumped back when it was violently thrown open. A group of 3 men dressed in what I could only describe as medieval clothing strode in, grinning. "Oi! Some crazy bloke really did open a new pub outside of Winterfell without telling Lord Bolton," the first man said. He was covered in dirt and looked like he hadn't bathed in months. I didn't discriminate against people from different dimensions, but even Henry, who used to live in the middle of nowhere, made an effort to bathe every day. Now, she just used my shower, of course. "Looky here, boys. Look at the set of tits on this wench," the second man said, pointing at Regina. She glared at him in disgust, but that didn't stop him from stepping forward and trying to blatantly grope her. Crack! He screamed a second later when Regina grabbed his wrist and snapped it like a twig. "She broke me wrist. Damn you, wench. I'd appreciate it if you gentlemen left," I said, the hair on my tails bristling in anger. "Your kind isn't welcome here." One of the men finally took a good look around the restaurant. His eyes landed on me behind the counter and then darted to Counselor Tevos, who was watching the scene with mild curiosity. "Oi! This place is full of magic demons. We need to get out of here. We need to tell Lord Bolton about this." The 3 of them scrambled out of my restaurant like frightened rats, and I couldn't help but let out a sigh. I had no doubt a hassle was coming my way soon enough. Regina growled under her breath. "Those humans were lucky I didn't rip them to pieces for their disrespect. I just didn't want to get your restaurant dirty with their blood." She let out one last huff before storming out of the foxhole. I was thankful for her restraint. Blood is a bitch to scrub out of hardwood floors, even with magic. "What was that about?" Counselor Tevos asked. "Those humans were very rude." "Some men are simply pigs," Serana said. She would know, considering how many bandits she'd probably killed in her long lifetime. Counselor Tevos nodded. "I'm glad my entire race is female." Chapter 27, This place is cold, Haru. I stood at the stove, flipping Serana's favorite blood sausages in a sizzling pan. Beside me, a pot of alien stew simmered gently. It was an Asari dish I'd recently learned to make, specifically for Counselor Tevos. The recipe called for an alien version of chicken that, according to Tevos, all Asari loved. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, blending the earthy scent of the blood sausages. Serana leaned against the counter, watching me work. "So, how long do you think it'll be before those rude men come back with more of their friends to try and kill all the magic demons?" she asked while smirking at me. I glanced at her and shrugged. "Hopefully never, because damn did they stink, but knowing our luck, it's probably just a matter of time before they storm back in here," I said while checking the sausages again, making sure they didn't overcook. Counselor Tevos had moved from her booth and was now sitting at the counter. There was a slight frown on her face. "Should I call CSEC and have them come over?" she asked, looking genuinely concerned. I shook my head. "I'm sure it's fine. Those 3 looked like they came from a very low-tech dimension. Judging by their clothes and attitudes, they're probably from a place where magic is hated or feared." Tevos huffed. "Why is it that every single dimension except my own seems to get actual magic?" She sounded almost jealous. I grinned as I stirred the stew. "I mean, Biotics is pretty much just magic in space. Tevos narrowed her eyes at me, giving me a stink eye that would have made a lesser man sweat. Instead, I just sent her a playful wink that made her pretty blue cheeks turn a bit purple. I chuckled and focused on finishing the dishes. The smell of the stew grew richer as I added the final touches, and Surana leaned closer, her eyes locked hungrily on the blood sausages cooking in the pan. I placed the blood sausages on a plate and set it in front of Surana. She immediately started digging in, barely giving me a glance as she focused on her meal. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. After a moment, I grabbed a bowl and scooped some of the alien stew into it, the rich aroma wafting through the air. I carefully placed it in front of Counselor Tevos. The Aseri picked up a spoon, scooped up some of the stew, and took a sip. She froze mid-motion, her eyes widening in shock. "How is this even possible?" she asked. "This is better than my own mother used to make." I chuckled at her reaction. "Honestly, I have no idea. It's my first time making it. Maybe it's the earth spices I added. They seem to bring out the alien flavors more." Tevos nodded eagerly as she took another spoonful. "Whatever it is, you've perfected it. If you ever visit Thesha, I'm dragging you to my family's house to show them how it's done." I grinned but didn't reply. My attention drifted across the restaurant to where Harry sat with Sirius and Remus. Both men had woken up after being shocked unconscious and were now pouting like children. They sulked about losing their wands while Harry sat across from them, lecturing them. Harry's voice carried across the room as he recounted Dumbledore's schemes, explaining how the old man had manipulated him his entire life. Whenever Sirius or Remus tried to argue or defend the old wizard, Harry would glare at them, and sparks of electricity would dance across his fingers. The sight made both men gulp and fall silent, forcing them to continue listening. Surana glanced up from her blood sausages, watching the scene with mild amusement. "My apprentice is learning to stand up for himself. I'm so proud," she said. She finished her plate and leaned back slightly. "Now, if only I could get my other apprentice to stop spending so much time on her schooling. Schooling she's probably never going to use in her lifetime." I snorted in agreement. Yeah, Harry's dimension never really made sense to me. What's the point of having magic if most of the population ends up with desk jobs and paperwork for the rest of their lives? "Maybe she just needs a proper apprenticeship," Tevos said, slurping her soup slowly. "Most Aseri children finish schooling by 60 years old and then spend the next 40 to 50 years apprenticing in their career fields until they become proper adults and can start working on their own." Tevos's statement made both me and Surana choke. 40 to 50 years. I muttered in disbelief. As a former human in my last life, that amount of time was absurd. Even Surana, who had centuries of experience as a vampire, looked shocked. Tevos raised a blue eyebrow. "What? That's completely normal for Aseri. You need that much time to master a field properly." "I guess so," I said while shaking my head. The door to the restaurant swung open, and I looked up from behind the counter, half expecting some angry men to storm in. Instead, it was Amy-chan. She was wearing a proper kimono, her hair neatly done, and even her makeup looked flawless. It was rare to see her look so put together. She gave me a small glare before walking over to the counter and sitting down next to Surana and Counselor Tevos. "Hello, Goddess Amaterasu. It's lovely to see you again," Tevos said politely. Amy-chan bowed her head in response and smiled. "It's nice to see you again as well, Counselor Tevos. How's space?" Tevos hesitated. "Space is fine." Amy-chan nodded before turning to me with a pout. "You know, before you started this restaurant, I could just laze in my room all day playing games and watching anime. Now people are actually expecting me to attend meetings and stuff because Japan has been getting so many foreign visitors who keep asking us questions about the rising yokai faction. I had 3 separate meetings today alone with other annoying factions that actually thought they could get me to spill your secrets for free." "Dumb assholes," she grumbled. I scratched one of my fox ears. I hadn't realized how much Amy-chan had been helping out. Sorry about that, Amy-chan. How about I make you whatever you want, on the house? Surana chuckled. Isn't all your food on the house nowadays? I shrugged. Yeah, I made a ton of gold selling all those dragon bones and scales. Enough to run this place for around a year, but it's the thought that counts. Amy-chan leaned forward, her pout disappearing. All right then, I demand your finest bowl of ramen, she declared proudly. Sansa Stark thought she was done crying. After everything that had happened, all the death, all the destruction of her family, she felt like she had no tears left to shed. Yet, as she sat on the edge of her bed in Winterfell, tears slipped down her cheeks. Her entire family legacy was in near ruins. As far as she knew, she was the last living Stark besides her brother Jon, who was on the wall. But she hadn't heard from Jon in years. She had returned to Winterfell after escaping King's Landing, only to find that her brother Robb, the king in the north, had been butchered along with his bride and their unborn child. Her mother, Catelyn Stark, had been left alive but was shipped back to Winterfell as a captive by the treacherous Freys. They used her as a pawn to keep the remnants of the Tully family from rallying the Riverlands to attack the twins. Winterfell was now ruled by the Boltons. Well, one Bolton. Lord Bolton had been killed by his insane bastard son, Ramsay, who now ruled the entirety of the north. Sansa had tears in her eyes as her mother gently rubbed her back, trying to console her for what was going to happen later that night. It's going to be okay, Sansa, Catelyn told her gently. Sansa knew it wasn't going to be okay. Later that night, she was to be wed to Ramsay Bolton. She was going to be married to a monster, possibly even worse than Joffrey. She didn't think that was even possible. I don't want to marry him, Mother. I'd rather die and join the rest of our family. Sansa said, her voice shaking with anger and despair. Catelyn gasped and grabbed Sansa's hands. Don't think like that. You're the last of the Starks, my sweetling. If you die, all hope is truly lost for the North and for our people. Sansa pulled her hands away, her tears falling freely now. Then what am I supposed to do? Let Ramsay marry me and then torture and rape me every night for the rest of my life, she shouted. I would have preferred staying in King's Landing and marrying Tyrion Lannister if I'd known what would happen once I got home. Catelyn hugged Sansa tightly. You know, I used to be incredibly devout, she admitted. I used to believe the gods had a plan for us all. But now I just believe we have to do everything we can to survive. I don't know what happened to Arya, Bran, or Rickon. You might be my last living child, and I will do everything I can to keep you alive. So please, don't talk about taking your own life. I watched those Frey bastards murder Robb and his unborn child in front of me. It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. Please don't make me watch another of my children die. Sansa wiped her tears and sighed. Okay, Mother, she said quietly. She would try to be strong for her. A knock on the door interrupted them. Before Sansa could respond, the door was rudely thrown open. Hello, my beautiful future bride and mother-in-law, Ramsay Snow said, stepping into the room with a smug grin. His retinue of soldiers were right behind him, giving Sansa and her mother disgusting looks. I can't wait for our wedding later tonight. It's only a few hours away now. Sansa grimaced and looked away. What do you want? She asked coldly. Ramsay's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. I've got a little pre-wedding present for you. It seems someone has decided to open a new pub just outside of Winterfell without my explicit permission. We can't have that. Sansa's stomach sank. She already knew where this was going. They even threatened some of my soldiers and had them howling about magic demons or some nonsense, Ramsay continued. I thought I'd put on a little entertainment before the big ceremony and gut every single person in that pub. Of course, as the future Lady Bolton, you and your mother will be coming along to watch. He sounded so incredibly happy about casually murdering some probably innocent small folk. Sansa shuddered, but she had seen plenty of cruelty in the past couple of years. She and her mother followed Ramsay and his men out of the castle and towards the pub. When she saw the building, she actually gasped in surprise. It was incredibly well put together with actual glass windows that she couldn't see into for some reason, along with amazing carpentry. The Foxhole. Sansa murmured as she read the sign. Ramsay pointed at a couple of his men and told them to go and drag the people inside out so he could punish them. Nearby small folk who lived in Wintertown were already starting to gather to see what the commotion was about. Sansa watched from the edge of the crowd as a group of Ramsay's men stormed into the pub with cruel grins on their faces. She expected to hear shouting or the sounds of violence once they entered the building, but instead, there was only eerie silence after the wooden door closed behind them. The small folk around her began murmuring, their voices rising with confusion and unease. There wasn't a building here yesterday. I pass by this route every day before I go scavenging in the woods. There's never been a pub here. Is this witchcraft? Is this some kind of sign from the old gods? Sansa exchanged a glance with her mother as the rumors swirled and grew more ridiculous by the second. She tried to block out the chatter, but even she couldn't deny how strange this entire situation was. A full minute passed with no sound from inside the pub, and Ramsay's cruel smirk twisted into an annoyed frown. He tapped his boot impatiently and then barked at his remaining men. What's taking them so long? He turned to another group of soldiers. Go in and check on them. Before they could move, the pub's door swung open, and multiple bodies came flying out. Ramsay's men landed in the mud with sickening thuds, their bodies motionless. Sansa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she saw the burns covering their skin. Smoke rose from their furs, and the air smelled faintly of charred flesh. The door opened again, and a boy with messy hair stepped out, flanked by two disheveled men. The boy couldn't have been older than 10 and 4, though he carried himself with a confidence that seemed far beyond his years. Damn, you really did a number on these three, Harry. Is that the same spell you used on us? One of the men asked. Sansa's breath caught. Did he just say spell? The boy, who must have been Harry, glanced at the crowd gathered outside. He raised an eyebrow at the onlookers. Can we help you all? Ramsay's men bristled at the casual question, their hands moving to their weapons. I don't think these guys are friendly, Harry, the more shabbily dressed man said. Ramsay stepped forward, his sneer growing wider. Are you small folk the owners of this pub? Harry tilted his head. Me? I don't know what a small folk is, but no. I don't own this restaurant. I'm just a regular customer of the Foxhole. It's owned by Haru. Why? The word restaurant sounded strange and foreign to her, but she assumed it was another word for pub. Ramsay's sneer turned into a snarl. This is an illegal business that was opened without my permission. Bring out this Haru at once so that he can face his punishment. And did you three assault my men? You'll be punished as well. Sansa bit her lip, wanting to tell the boy and his companions to run, but she knew it would be pointless. She expected fear from the trio, but while the two men looked a little uneasy, Harry only scoffed and rolled his eyes. Next to Sansa, Catelyn gasped at the boy's audacity as Harry turned his head toward Winterfell, nodding slightly. That's a nice castle. Are you sure you even still own it? He asked Ramsay casually. What? Ramsay's face turned red. Of course I own Winterfell. Harry shrugged. I don't know, man. It seems like everywhere Haru's restaurant pops up, he ends up owning a lot of the surrounding land. He's the prince of his entire race and lord of another massive chunk of land already. Sansa's heart raced at the declaration. Another prince? And he had opened a restaurant, right outside Winterfell? She glanced at her mother, who looked equally confused. Ramsay's face twisted with rage. Bring him out at once so I can flay him alive for his audacity. Harry snorted. Whatever, dude, Your funeral. What's a dude? Sansa whispered to her mother. She'd never heard that word before. Catelyn shook her head nervously. I don't know. Harry and the two men walked back into the pub. A few seconds later, the door opened again, and a man stepped out. No, not a man, something else. Sansa's heart fluttered as she laid eyes on him. He was the most handsome person she had ever seen, despite his unusual features. His hair was golden, and animal-like ears peeked out from the top of his head. Behind him, multiple golden tails swayed lazily. What is he? One of Ramsay's men shouted. Shit! Dalton wasn't drunk off his ass after all. It actually is a demon, another soldier stammered. Wow! Sansa heard her mother mutter. Catelyn clenched her hand tightly. Sansa glanced up at her mother and was shocked to see she too was blushing as she stared at the strange handsome being, Haru. The ground was covered in snow and mud. I shivered slightly, my tails bristling against the icy air. Damn, it was really cold out here. There were a lot of humans gathered outside my restaurant in this new dimension. Most of them looked unwashed, just like the two groups of men who had rudely barged inside earlier. The first group ran off after Regina scared them, but the second group decided to draw steel. That was a mistake, and Harry had handled them easily with his lightning magic. The door swung open behind me, and Amy-chan stepped out, her presence immediately drawing more gasps from the gathered crowd. She wrinkled her nose in the air as she looked around. What kind of shithole is this place? Not every dimension has modern technology, I told her. You can go back inside if the stench is too much for you. Amy-chan scoffed. You forget I've been around since humans first set foot in Japan. I've seen and smelled it all at this point. Besides, whatever's about to happen looks fun, and I could use some entertainment after all the boring meetings I've been stuck in for weeks. One of the men shouted in our direction. He stood out from the rest, surrounded by fearful-looking soldiers. His voice carried over the murmuring crowd. What are you, creature? Leave Winterfell at once and begone, lest the old gods strike you down. The crowd behind him murmured nervously at his declaration. Old gods. I repeated, spreading out my senses to check. I didn't feel even a hint of divinity nearby. I glanced at Amy-chan. She was probably doing the same thing. There are no gods here, Amy-chan announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd gasped, and angry shouts erupted. How dare you claim the old gods don't exist? Who do you think you are? Amy-chan clicked her tongue in irritation and stepped forward. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people, gasped when her body began to glow with golden light. Flames flickered around her, dancing harmlessly against her form. Who am I? She repeated, her voice sharp. I am Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun. And if I say there are no gods in this land, then that is because there aren't any. As she spoke, the light around her intensified. The dull, gray skies brightened considerably. Even though the sun was already sinking below the horizon. The crowd grew restless. The gods have descended. There's two of them. Have they come to punish the Boltons and free us from their evil? Who said that? I'll kill you, the man leading the soldiers snarled, spinning toward the crowd and drawing the sword at his hip. The unwashed masses all backed away fearfully. I frowned at the sight. This guy was obviously some kind of tyrant, and I already knew we weren't going to be getting along. I figured there was only one way this was going to go down. The man finished shouting at the crowd, then turned to us, pointing his sword directly at Amy-chan and me. You are no gods. You are simply mummers with some strange magical tricks at your disposal. I've heard those red priests from Essos can also play tricks with the light. I am Ramsay Bolton, the Lord of Winterfell and the North. For daring to go against me, I sentence you to death. Open fire, men. He swung his sword, and about a dozen archers raised their bows. In the next second, stone-tipped wooden arrows were flying straight at us. I flicked my tails forward, swatting the arrows out of the air with ease. Not a single one came close to hitting either of us. Not that they would have hurt us in the first place. Ramsay's face twisted with disbelief. That's impossible, he shouted. Don't stop shooting. More arrows flew our way. I rolled my eyes as my tails moved again, knocking every single arrow aside. By the fourth volley, I'd had enough. I raised my right hand, summoning a plume of blue fox fire, causing gasps and screams from the gathered crowd. The fox fire didn't touch any of the bystanders, but it went straight for the archers. They yelped in pain as their bows turned to ash in their hands, leaving them weaponless. That was some pretty good control, Haru-kun, Amy-chan said. Thanks. I've been practicing, I said to her. I'm hoping to get good enough that I can use my fox fire to cook one day without immediately ruining the ingredients. Amy-chan snickered. Of course you are. Most other people would say they're training to become more powerful, but not you, Haru-kun. The fact that Amy-chan and I were having a casual conversation while these humans were trying to kill us showed just how little of a threat they actually were. Charge! Ramsay Bolton shouted loudly. His soldiers hesitated for a moment, fear evident on their faces, but they didn't dare disobey his orders. Kill them all. That girl looks like a foreign princess. Let's rape her. I want to taste her first. The men were absolutely disgusting, and threatening an actual goddess to her face with that kind of language. Yeah, they were all dead. I'd never actually seen Amy-chan this upset before. The golden flames flickering around her turned black, surging forward and engulfing dozens of the men rushing at us with spears and swords. They didn't even have time to scream properly before the flames devoured them completely. When it was over, there was nothing left but ash. The only one left alive was Ramsay Bolton himself. I don't even think he realized all of his men were dead. He charged through the snow and mud, his sword raised as he aimed for my head. When he swung, I raised my left hand and caught the blade in my palm. It was just regular steel, not enchanted at all. Impossible. Ramsay's eyes widened in disbelief. Before he could say anything else, I punched him hard in the stomach with my free hand, shattering the chainmail armor he wore under his furs. He dropped to his knees, coughing up bile and blood before collapsing. He was unconscious. Well, that happened. I muttered as I glanced around. Most of the crowd was either staring at me in awe or genuine fear. More than a few people had dropped to their knees and were muttering prayers to me and Amy-chan. She had calmed down a bit, but she still didn't look very happy. Humph. That's what they get for thinking they can defile a goddess. Amy-chan declared while crossing her arms. Yeah, they were really, really dumb, I pointed out. Not even the people of Konoha had been this bad. Or had they? Honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. Two women, who stood out from the rest of the crowd due to being clean and dressed in elegant furs, slowly approached us. Both of them were redheads, clearly mother and daughter, and they were both stunning. I rolled my eyes, wondering if the goddess who kept connecting new dimensions to my restaurant was doing this to me on purpose. The pair looked nervous, so I stepped around Ramsay's unconscious body and smiled at them. Hello, my name is Haru. Sorry you ladies had to see all of that. You weren't, friends with this guy, were you? The answer came when the younger girl walked over and started kicking Ramsay's unconscious body, muttering some very creative swear words under her breath. The older woman, meanwhile, spoke to me. No, the Boltons used to be our sworn bannermen, but they betrayed our family and murdered my son Rob, the previous king in the north. I am Catelyn Stark, and that over there is my daughter Sansa. Are you both really gods? She looked at me nervously. I thought the gods had forsaken my family after everything that happened. We probably have a lot to talk about. Chapter 28, Pizza Time. I brought Catelyn and Sansa Stark inside the foxhole. The two noble ladies looked around with wide eyes, clearly surprised by the place. Sansa glanced at the bright lights on the ceiling and then at the spotless floors and walls. Is this all because of magic? Sansa asked. I chuckled. The lights are from something called electricity, which I'll explain later. And while I do use a little magic to keep the place clean, most of it is thanks to my hard-working waitress, Henry. Catelyn Stark reached out and grabbed her daughter's hand when Counselor Tevos walked past them. Her reaction was one of pure shock, but Tevos didn't notice, or at least pretended she didn't. The alien smiled at me and thanked me for the meal. I'll be back tomorrow, Haru, Tevos said before heading out the door. Catelyn and Sansa watched her leave and then whipped their heads toward me. She was completely blue. Was she a goddess as well? Catelyn asked nervously. Is this a place meant for the divine to meet? No, she's something called an Asari. I scratched the back of my head, feeling a little awkward. And this place isn't just for gods. It's a place for everyone to meet, enjoy a meal, or make friends, no matter where they're from or their status. I consider all my customers to be family. Like Harry over there. Harry, sitting across the restaurant, waved his hand. Hello. Sansa waved back at him gently. Hello again, young man. You were very brave for standing up to Ramsay like you did. Harry scoffed. Not really. Those muggles couldn't have done anything to hurt me. He stood up and nodded at me. I've got to go, Haru. Sorry about the way my uncles acted earlier. I'll make sure to straighten them out. With that, Harry left with Remus and Sirius in tow. Surana and Amy-chan were still at the counter, watching the exchange. Surana smirked at me. Don't think you can kick me out so easily, just so you can have a red-headed mother-daughter pair all to yourself. I'm waiting for my man Agner to get back from his adventure, she told me. Amy-chan nodded as well. And I'm hiding from Tsukuyomi. If he finds me then he'll make me go back to work. What does our red hair have to do with anything? Catelyn asked Surana. Surana chuckled from across the room. Oh. Haru has a small but growing harem of beautiful women with red hair. You two might want to watch out because I could see him checking you both out. I felt my face heat up. I wasn't that obvious. What? Amy-chan perked up, her grin widening. You have a harem now, Haru-kun. Is little Yachan's baby boy finally all grown up and now breaking the hearts of redheads everywhere? How scandalous. Pfft, I don't want to hear the word scandalous from a goddess who had kids with her own brother, I replied. Incest is a human concept. It doesn't matter to supernatural beings. Amy-chan pouted and grabbed a salt shaker, tossing it at my head. I caught it easily before it could hit me in the face. Catelyn and Sansa both blushed, muttering to themselves about how an actual goddess could be so crass. I led Catelyn and Sansa to one of the booths closer to the counter and gestured for them to sit. They looked hesitant, but after a moment, they settled into the seats. I'm going to prepare a meal for you both, I told them. Catelyn's eyebrows rose slightly. Will you be bringing out bread and salt? I shook my head. I'll be bringing you something much tastier than that. They exchanged a glance, clearly curious but said nothing. I walked behind the counter and opened the fridge, pulling out a large wad of dough. They came from a medieval world, so I doubted they'd ever had pizza. It was time to fix that. I started working on the dough with my hands, stretching and shaping it into multiple perfect circles. My tails reached into the fridge, pulling out the other ingredients I needed. Tomatoes, onions, sausages, ham, and obviously not pineapple. I wasn't a monster. While I mashed the tomatoes with the onions and other spices to make a quick but flavorful pizza sauce, I could feel their eyes on me. I poured the sauce into a pot and let it heat up while grabbing a block of cheese from the fridge. I began slicing it with a knife, making sure the pieces were just the right size to melt evenly. Amy-chan and Surana were watching from their spots at the counter. Amy-chan was practically salivating. If I knew you were making pizza, I wouldn't have asked for ramen earlier. Why not just have both? I suggested with a wink. Amy-chan grinned. That's why you're my third favorite nine-tailed fox, Haru-kun. I paused. Third favorite. She said, counting on her fingers. Yasaka is number 1, of course, because she's my priestess. Kuna-chan is number 2 because she's totes adorbs, which leaves you at number 3. Surana snickered from her seat. Aren't there only 3 nine-tailed foxes total in your world, Haru? Talk about emotional damage. I sighed, my fox ears drooping slightly. Yes. Being in third place suddenly felt much worse than it should have. Just for that, I was going to put pineapple on Amy-chan's pizza. Amy-chan looked at me in pure betrayal as I placed a personal pizza on the counter in front of her. One of her toppings was pineapple. Something wrong? I asked with a tiny grin. I was holding back from openly laughing, but it didn't matter. My tails were swaying happily behind me, giving me away. Amy-chan narrowed her eyes and started picking off the pieces of pineapple one by one. I will have vengeance for this betrayal, Haru-kun. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day soon. I gulped involuntarily, even as I let out a small chuckle. I grabbed 2 more personal pizzas and walked them over to Catelyn and Sansa's booth. Catelyn and Sansa Stark glanced down at the pizzas in front of them with confusion. What is this? Catelyn asked. It's a pizza pie, topped with tomatoes, sausages, pepperoni, mushrooms, onions, and olives. I promise you 2 will love it. I was about to explain the proper way to eat pizza but then remembered these were 2 classy ladies. Sure enough, they both picked up their forks and knives and started cutting into the pizza to eat it that way. Amy-chan muttered something about blasphemy behind us as she picked up a slice of her pizza, now free of pineapple, and shoved it into her mouth. I just shook my head. Other cultures had different ways of eating, it wasn't a big deal. The red-haired mother and daughter both let out actual moans as they took their first bites of my homemade pizza. My ears twitched happily on top of my head. Those were the kinds of noises I always loved hearing from my customers. Catelyn Stark, it's so good. Sansa said to her happily. It certainly is, Sansa. Catelyn Stark couldn't help but agree with her daughter. The pizza pie in front of her was absolutely delicious. She had to remind herself that it wasn't proper for a noble lady to shovel food into her mouth, but that's exactly what she found herself tempted to do. She glanced at Sansa, who was already halfway through her own pizza, happily eating without a care in the world. Catelyn almost chastised her but stopped herself. Sansa had been through so much in the last couple of years. If anyone deserved a moment of happiness, it was her daughter. So, she stayed quiet, even as Sansa's face became covered with the delicious red sauce. Catelyn took another bite and marveled at the taste. She had eaten plenty of tomatoes growing up in the Riverlands, but none of them had ever tasted like this. Haru's sauce transformed the simple ingredient into something magical. Her gaze wandered to Haru, who was busy working behind the counter, and she felt her cheeks warm. He was undoubtedly the most handsome young man she had ever seen. Even Rhaegar Targaryen in his prime had nothing on Haru. Back in her youth, she would have giggled with the other southern ladies about someone like him. She glanced at Sansa again, noticing her plate was already completely clean. Sansa wiped her face with a napkin, looking content for the first time in ages. Catelyn was glad their host hadn't been paying attention to how quickly her now-grown daughter had devoured her meal. It wasn't very ladylike. What should we do now, Mother? Sansa asked nervously. Her eyes drifted toward the front of the restaurant, where Ramsay Bolton was still unconscious and tied up. He's our prisoner, but most of his men still control Winterfell and Wintertown. The only thing we can do is rely on our kind and handsome host to keep helping us, Catelyn said reflexively. Sansa grinned at her. Oh. You think he's handsome too, Mother? Yes, Catelyn admitted, feeling her cheeks heat up a bit. Sansa gave her a small smile. I do too. Do you think he's married? The sun goddess mentioned him having a harem, Catelyn said. That's something noblemen from Essos sometimes have. Sansa's eyes lit up. Oh, that means I have a chance then. That means you could have a chance too. Catelyn choked on air at her daughter's comment. What? Sansa. I'm your mother, and I've been married before. We can't both pursue the same young man. It's not proper. Sansa pursed her lips and scoffed. Proper. I hate that word. Cersei Lannister always acted like a proper lady, but she was a monster. The only thing that matters is whether or not you're happy. Catelyn understood where Sansa was coming from, she supposed, but this was still kind of an awkward topic to talk about with her own daughter. She opened her mouth to change the subject when Sansa blurted out an embarrassing question. I wonder how good of a lover Haru is. Sansa said bluntly. He does have a harem after all. Catelyn froze. When did you start talking like this? What happened to my sweet girl who was always quiet and blushing? Sansa frowned. I let that girl die back in King's Landing. She said quietly. Then, she gave her mother a playful look. Now answer the question. Catelyn felt her cheeks burn as if she were a young maiden again. I suppose he would have to be quite the skilled lover if he has a harem. Also, those tails are so exotic and look very fluffy. I wonder what they'd feel like wrapped around me in a warm bed. Sansa perked up. I was wondering that too. Catelyn stole another glance at Haru, who was still working behind the counter. The back of his neck was bright red, and his ears were twitching. Realization dawned on her, and her cheeks turned an even deeper shade of pink. Oh dear. She muttered. Haru had fox ears. He could hear everything they had been saying. Catelyn was saved from that embarrassing revelation when the doors to the restaurant swung open. A large man who resembled a knight strolled inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. Hello again, Lord Haru. It has been a while since we met. Hello as well, ladies, the man said with a small bow to everyone in the room. Sansa and Catelyn both nodded their heads to him as was proper, though they exchanged a curious glance. The man's armor looked worn but well kept, and there was a confident ease in the way he carried himself. The man's gaze landed on Ramsay Bolton, who was still tied up near the front of the restaurant. He raised an eyebrow before shrugging and continuing to the counter. Haru, there's a guy I haven't seen in a while. I'd been wondering what had happened to him. After he left with his warrior band and the prisoners, he never returned or sent any messages. It's been a while, Gazef, I said as he stepped up to the counter. How are things in the Riestai's kingdom? Gazef frowned as he sat down on a stool at the counter. Things have been interesting, I suppose. The men we captured, the ones who destroyed multiple villages and tried to do the same to your territory, turned out to be from the slain theocracy, not the empire like they pretended. Yep, that's what our own yokai interrogators found, I said. Before they all took their own lives, anyway. They were fanatics, and seemed to hate non-humans with a passion. Yasaka mentioned they kept ranting about their 6 great human gods coming to avenge them. But that didn't make much sense. If they were human, then how could they be actual gods? We just figured it was some nation built on a cult or something. Gazef nodded grimly. The theocracy also bribed some of the kingdom's nobles to have me sent out without my proper armor or equipment. It was a trap meant to get me killed. The corruption runs deep. He sighed heavily. Thankfully, the king and princess have started rooting it out after this incident. We have you to thank for that, Lord Haru. Not only did you pull our country back from the brink of economic collapse, but you also saved us once again. I surely would have died without your help and Lord Momonga's. Oh, he changed his name to Ainsul Gown, by the way, I told him. Lord Ains, then. I would like to thank him as well, and so would the king. Both of you are formally invited to the capital to meet with the royal family. Gazef declared. Well, look at you, Amy-chan said playfully from nearby, leaning casually against the counter. Moving up in the world, Haru. You're going to meet an actual king. It seemed like the goddess of the sun was feeling extra playful today. I rolled my eyes at Amy-chan's comment before focusing back on Gazef. I'd love to visit the Riestai's kingdom, but first, I have to help out the two noble ladies in my restaurant. Of course, I'd also love to hear their stories first, I said, making sure my voice carried loud enough for Catelyn and Sansa to join in the conversation. Catelyn stood up, and introduced herself and her daughter Sansa properly to Gazef. Once the introductions were out of the way, she began telling us about the Stark family, Winterfell, and everything that had happened since her late husband had decided to accept the title of Hand of the King. It was a pretty epic and sad tale. Her story probably took an hour to explain, but no one interrupted her. When she finished, Sansa started filling in with her own perspective, explaining all the events in Westeros from her point of view. Wow, that all sounded pretty rough, Surana said after a moment of silence. Amy-chan folded her arms, looking unimpressed. How drunk can a single guy be to not realize his own wife hasn't joined him in bed after 14 years? Not to mention none of his children looked even a tiny bit like him. He deserved to get cucked. Gazef and I both sputtered at the same time. No guy deserves that. We both shouted and then nodded at each other. I turned back to Catelyn and Sansa. I'm sorry that all happened to you both, I said sincerely. Of course, I'll help you take back Winterfell and slay the rest of the Bolton soldiers. Afterward, I suppose I could ask some of our yokai to guard the place so it doesn't happen again. I trailed off, glancing at Catelyn. She shook her head firmly. The Seven Kingdoms is a beautiful and cruel place. Houses only respect other strong houses. The truth is, most of Winterfell's loyal guards are dead or have abandoned their posts. Even our weakest vassals could overthrow us at this point, she started explaining. I frowned, wondering where she was going with all this. That's why I propose you marry my daughter Sansa and become Lord of Winterfell and King of the North. Catelyn declared out of nowhere. I nearly choked. Whoa. Isn't that a little fast? Wow. You're really moving up in the world, Haru. Amy-chan laughed again playfully. You get to be king of this freezing cold and dirty paradise. Sansa's face was bright red as she stammered, Mother. My hand alone isn't worth everything that will be required to get Winterfell and the North back on its feet. She turned to me. You have to marry my mother as well. My uncle Edmure was slain by the evil bastard Joffrey, which means she's the rightful heiress to the Riverlands as well. With both of our hands in marriage, you'll rule a territory half the size of Westeros. Heir. I didn't know what to say to all of that. Mom would probably be ecstatic about me gaining even more territory in another world, especially one full of untapped natural resources. She'd probably agree in a heartbeat. But I'd been trying to slow down on all the girls lately. Then again, a beautiful red-headed mother-daughter combo wasn't something that came along every day. I scratched the back of my head, trying to come up with a response. I'll think about it, I finally managed. Both mother and daughter smiled brightly at me. Catelyn looked a bit embarrassed at Sansa's proposal, but I noticed she didn't even try to argue it. Either way, the first step in all this would be getting Winterfell back from all the Bolton soldiers occupying it. According to Catelyn, there were about 5,000 of them. That wouldn't be a problem, obviously, but it was going to mean a lot of death and take quite a bit of time, especially since they'd be spread out and probably start fleeing the moment they realized they couldn't win. Then there was the cleanup afterward. That many bodies weren't just going to disappear on their own. Gazef thumped his fist against his chest plate and pledged to help. You have my sword for this cause, Lord Haru. I nodded, appreciating his support. I wondered if we could get anyone else to help too. Just to save time. As I was considering our options, the door to the restaurant popped open, and Agner strolled in. His black ebony armor had a few scratches and marks on it, but his happy grin told me everything I needed to know about how his mission went with Naruto and her team. "Hello, everyone. I'm back from quite the adventure," Agner declared proudly. He focused on Surana, who had already gotten up from her seat. "Hello, my love," Surana said as they hugged. "Did you have fun killing some ninja terrorists?" "Ha! It was quite the adventure," Agner said, puffing out his chest a little. "Those Red Cloud ninjas were a sneaky bunch and proved to be quite the challenge, but we prevailed. They were no match for the Dragonborn." He then glanced around the room and seemed to sense something. "What's this? Do I sense another adventure is already brimming?" he asked excitedly while glancing between Gazef and I. Without speaking any words, Agner and Gazef both reached out and clasped hands. And just like that, I was pretty sure both warriors immediately became friends. That's just how guys were sometimes. "Haru. I'm back, Haru-kun." Naruto strolled inside the restaurant. Her kunoichi outfit had a couple rips and tears in it, but she looked to be completely fine otherwise. The half-a-cubi inside her kept her in top shape most of the time. Naruto suddenly froze when she noticed Catelyn and Sansa standing so close to me though. Oh. I hadn't even gone on a proper date with Naruto yet and I'd already slept with Shepard and now was in those kinds of talks with these women. This was going to be some awkward catching up. She practically blurred in front of the two of them, causing both ladies to startle. Naruto frowned and crossed her arms while glaring at them. "Who are you two supposed to be?" Chapter 29, A Change of Plans. "Haru, I was joking before when I said you were breaking red-headed hearts." "How could you, Haru-kun?" Amy-chan asked me playfully. I stood behind the counter, nervously watching the scene unfolding in front of me. Naruto had her arms crossed and let out a huff, her purple eyes narrowing suspiciously on Catelyn and Sansa. "Who are you two supposed to be?" Sansa held her head high as she responded. "My name is Sansa Stark," she declared proudly. "The future queen of Lord Haru's lands. And this is my mother, Catelyn Stark. She will be marrying him as well as his second queen." Catelyn blushed but didn't deny her daughter's bold statement. I groaned and facepalmed. That hasn't been completely agreed upon yet," I muttered, mostly to myself. Agner suddenly let out a booming laugh, slapping the counter hard over and over with his armored hand. "Haru, you are a true legend. A real man among men. The warriors at Jorvaskr will be toasting to your accomplishments with the ladies for years to come." "Sometimes I wish that I could." Agner did not get to finish what he was foolishly about to say. Surana suddenly scowled and waved her hand in Agner's direction. A layer of frost washed over him, making him yelp. "So cold." Agner shouted and started shivering. "You better not be getting any ideas, husband," Surana said to him, and then shot a pointed look my way. The message was clear: stop giving Agner ideas about his own harem. I held my hands up in surrender. "I didn't mean to." Gazef walked over to Agner and helped him start peeling the chunks of ice from his armor. Naruto's jaw dropped as she gaped at the red-headed mother and daughter duo. She turned back to me. "What the hell, Haru-kun? I was gone for like 2 days tops. Stuff happened," I said weakly, knowing how lame that excuse sounded even as it left my mouth. Sansa stepped forward with a polite smile. "Are you one of Haru's lovers?" she asked Naruto. "If so, I hope we can become good friends, possibly even sisters." Naruto turned bright red, waving her hands frantically. Lovers. What? No way. Haru-kun and I haven't even gone on a date yet." Sansa tilted her head slightly. "Oh, I do not know what the word date means, but if that means you're still a maiden, you don't have to worry." "So am I." I noticed Catelyn facepalm at her daughter's declaration. "You're not supposed to go around telling people that as a lady, Sansa." "Yeah. It's embarrassing," Naruto added. I walked out from behind the counter and wrapped Naruko in a hug. She stiffened in surprise, and I could feel her sputtering against my chest. After a moment, though, she hugged me back. I'll take you on whatever date you want, just as soon as I help the Stark women get their castle back, I said. Naruko perked up, pulling back enough to look at me with a wide grin. I'll hold you to that, Haru-kun. What do I need to do to help? Before I could answer, Amy-chan groaned dramatically from the counter. Ah, is that it? I wanted more drama. Where's the epic catfight? Why aren't you and Sansa rolling on the floor and pulling at each other's hair? She asked Naruko. You two are too wholesome. She grumbled, if it's drama you're after, sister, we have plenty waiting back in Takamagara, a smooth voice cut in. Everyone turned to see a man with long silver hair, almost brushing the floor, strolling into the restaurant. He was dressed immaculately, and his presence filled the room. Oh shit! It's Tsukuyumi! Amy-chan exclaimed. How did you find me here? Yasaka told me where you were as soon as I asked, Tsukuyumi replied calmly. It's time for you to return to Takamagara and get back to work. Before any of us could blink, Tsukuyumi blurred forward, appearing next to Amy-chan in an instant. He casually scooped her up under his arm like a sack of potatoes. No. I don't want to go back to work. Amy-chan complained, kicking her legs and pouting. The land of the rising sun has millions of neets. Why can't I be one too? Her eyes roamed around the restaurant before landing on me. Help me, Haru-kun. You're my only hope. I can't help you, Amy-chan. I'm only number 3 after all. I said wistfully. Betrayal. Amy-chan whined. Tsukuyumi ignored her protests, turning toward me and giving a polite bow. Thank you for keeping an eye on her, Haru, he said. He then bowed to everyone else in the room before calmly walking out the front door, still carrying his struggling sister. We all stared after him in stunned silence for a moment. What was that all about? Naruko asked, pulling away from my hug completely. It's another long story, I said, shaking my head. One you probably don't want to get into right now. I then turned back to Gazef and Agner. I appreciated them offering their help to me, but after thinking it over for a few moments, I came up with a better idea to help Sansa and Catelyn. Plus, Surana had basically been waiting for Agner to get back for 2 whole days and I didn't want to take up any more of their time by getting his help like I'd planned. Gazef was also visiting me as a foreign dignitary and I knew it would be bad for negotiations if he got hurt somehow liberating the North from the Boltons' rule. I didn't think he would, but it was better to just be safer. I thanked him for wanting to lend his aid before telling him he was free to stay in Kyoto for a few days and then I would head over with him to meet the royal family of the Riestei's kingdom. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Yasaka. She would probably send a pretty yokai girl, tour guide, to show Gazef around for the next few days and take care of all of his needs. Are you sure you don't need our help, my friend? Agner asked me. I told him we'd be fine and that he should take some time to calm down his pent-up vampire wife. Surana couldn't blush, but I felt like she would have been as she practically dragged the Dragonborn back to Whiterun. Once they all left, it was just myself, Naruko, Sansa, and Catelyn left in the foxhole. Why'd you send them away after they promised their aid? Catelyn asked me. I smiled at her and told her that we had other options. It's not just Winterfell, but the entire north that the Boltons rule, correct? I asked Catelyn and she grimaced before nodding. She said only a few houses haven't pledged themselves to Ramsay at this point. It's nice to see you again, Haru. Sorry about my behavior last time. Tsunade, the leader of the Hidden Leaf, said with a small blush on her cheeks. The other women in the room pointedly didn't ask what happened last time I was in here, but I could see Naruko shoot a small glare Tsunade's way before the busty blonde spoke up again. This time Tsunade was addressing Sansa and Catelyn. She had a grin on her face as she spoke. It's a pleasure to meet you both, Princess Sansa Stark. I'm not actually sure how to address you properly. she said to Catelyn. I was technically the queen mother when my son, Rob, was king of the north, but with him dead, I would simply be addressed as Lady Catelyn again. At least, until I get remarried. She trailed off with a blush. Tsunade chuckled after listening to Catelyn's explanation and nodded. Lady Catelyn, is it? Well, Haru here has offered to foot the bill for our village's services, but I'd like to hear the situation directly from you first. Catelyn nodded and began telling her story again. She didn't miss any details, going over everything that had happened to her family and the north. Tsunade listened carefully, only interrupting once or twice to ask questions about Westeros. Most of them were about how the political system worked, or how such chaos could happen in a world without ninja. When Catelyn finished, Tsunade sighed. Your continent sounds just as crazy as the elemental nations. And here I thought ninjas were the source of most problems. I used to think along those lines too, but then I had a discussion with Rias, who was a mega anime fan, and she set my opinions straight by telling me that the numbers don't lie and that ninjas were actually a good thing. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Oh. What numbers? How many ninja died during the Third Shinobi War? I asked her to humor me. Tsunade tapped her chin, thinking for a moment. I don't have the exact figures, but it was somewhere around 20,000 in total. It was a long and bloody war, but that's what I remember. That's all. Catelyn looked shocked. We had at least half that number perish in single battles. The North probably lost around 60,000 men after the War of the Five Kings ended. Sansa, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. If you count all the other kingdoms, it was easily over 500,000 soldiers who died. And maybe 1 million people total when you include the small folk who had their lands burned or their food stolen. Tsunade blanched at those numbers. That's more deaths in a couple of years than in all 3 shinobi wars combined, she said, shaking her head. I never realized, ninjas actually make the world more peaceful. She looked genuinely surprised at her own conclusion but quickly refocused. Right, back to the task at hand. Tsunade leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. I'll assign a large force to help you. Around 100 Chunin and Jonin. They'll completely purge the Bolton soldiers from the north and deal with the other lords who have turned traitorous against your family, she said to Catelyn and Sansa, who looked a bit confused at getting such a small force before I told them the average Chunin was worth about 100 regular men and a Jonin was worth around 1,000. Such power. Catelyn gasped. At least with the Boltons taken care of there won't be any more bloodshed in the north, Sansa said sadly. We have so few people left as it is. Tsunade asked my opinion of this plan and I nodded at her. This sounded like the right approach. I could handle a straight-up fight, no problem, but manhunting and assassinations across a massive territory like the north would simply take up too much of me and my friends' time. It was better to leave it to the literal professionals. We were in contract with a village of assassins, so we might as well use them after all. Thank you, Lady Tsunade, Catelyn said, bowing slightly. Sansa followed her mother's lead, looking genuinely grateful. Don't thank me yet, Tsunade said. We'll get it done, but it's going to be costly. She suddenly turned towards me and for a second I thought I saw her eyes literally shining with greed. If I didn't want the yokai coffers to take a big hit, then maybe I should pop over to Skyrim and hunt a couple dragons to pay for all this. The deal with Tsunade and the Leaf Village was finalized, and we left with a solid plan in place. I led the group back to my restaurant, feeling a little more relaxed now that things were moving forward. As soon as we stepped inside, I spotted Yasaka and Kunu waiting for me near the counter. Kunu's face lit up as soon as she saw me. She ran over and wrapped her arms around me tightly, practically bouncing with excitement. Harunaiken. You're back, she said, squeezing me like she hadn't seen me in years instead of just a couple of days. I ruffled her hair with a chuckle. Of course I'm back. Did you think I'd leave you to run this place on your own? Kuna giggled and shook her head before stepping back, her eyes darting curiously to the people behind me. Era. Yasaka said as she stood up gracefully. Her golden eyes sparkled as she took in Sansa, Catelyn, and Naruto. It seems like we have some new faces. All of them were looking at her, and Kunu hugging me, curiously. Yasaka, this is Catelyn Stark, her daughter Sansa, and Naruto, I said, introducing them. Everyone, this is Yasaka, my mother, and that's Kunu, my little sister. Your mother? Naruto sputtered in shock. Oh. Hello. She said nervously. Sansa looked just as nervous suddenly. Yasaka, Kunu was in the kitchen helping Haru make ice cream while Yasaka decided to have a chat with the ladies. Era, 3 new potential daughters-in-law. Fortune has been smiling on my family lately, Yasaka said, smiling warmly at the 3 nervous women sitting in the booth across from her. 2 of them were even a mother and daughter pair. Her son truly knew how to attract interesting women, or was the universe just throwing them his way at this point? Maybe it was that random goddesses doing, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. As if on cue, a scroll suddenly popped onto the table in front of Yasaka. She unrolled it, scanning the hastily written words. I'm not doing it. Why would I try to give myself more love rivals? Yasaka chuckled quietly. That cinched it. The goddess could definitely read everyone's thoughts in the restaurant. Haru had mentioned this earlier, but Yasaka wanted to test it herself. This goddess was truly a powerful being, but that was a thought for later. She stored the scroll away to inspect more thoroughly when she had time. You could learn a lot about a person from their writing alone. At this point, Yasaka was almost certain the goddess was a total tsundere. Her attention returned to the 3 red-haired women in front of her. Yasaka had heard about Naruto and even read the entire Naruto manga after finding out Haru's restaurant connected to a similar alternate version of that world. Naruto had quite a bit of chakra, with the proper training. She could easily become an ultimate class being. Yasaka approved of her as a potential match for Haru almost immediately. The whisker marks on Naruto's face only made her more endearing. What could Yasaka say? Foxes were the best. She then turned her attention to the 2 mortal women. Both were undeniably beautiful, and Yasaka detected traces of an ancient magical bloodline lingering in them. However, it was so diluted and weak that it was practically non-existent. They would require a lot of work to meet her high standards as potential daughters-in-law. Still, Yasaka believed in fairness. She would give them a chance to impress her. Lady Yasaka, Catelyn began, her tone formal and careful. Your son has been more than generous to us. We cannot thank him enough for the help he's already provided. Haru's heart has always been in the right place, Yasaka said, folding her hands neatly in her lap. But tell me, Lady Catelyn, how do you plan to repay such generosity? Catelyn's expression grew serious. My daughter and I are both unmarried, and through marriage, he could unify the North and the Riverlands under his protection. Sansa is the princess of the North, and I am the rightful heiress to the Riverlands. Together, we could offer Haru a large swath of territory and loyal bannermen once our lands recover from all the damages of the recent wars. Marry both of you? Yasaka asked, her golden eyes gleaming with intrigue. The territory sounds nice, but is that all you're both going to offer? Of course not. Sansa declared. As my lord husband, I will also grow to love Haru with all of my heart. She said it passionately, without any hesitation. Yasaka laughed softly as Haru's hand slipped, sending a jug of milk tumbling onto the floor. Milk spilled everywhere. Yasaka had never seen him mess up in the kitchen before, and she found it oddly endearing. Naruto sputtered, her cheeks turning red. I can't believe you just shouted that out loud. Haru and I haven't even gone on a date yet, but I'm not going to lose to you. It's not about losing, Sansa said. Also, I'm still a princess. There was a hint of smugness in her tone that made Yasaka admire the fire in the mortal princess. Naruto crossed her arms, not backing down. My brother's an idiot, so Tsunade never told him who our parents are, but I know. My mother was Kushina Uzumaki, and she was the granddaughter of the previous Yusukage, who was also the land's daimyo. That makes me a princess of the land of whirlpools as well. Yasaka's tails flicked to the sides as she smiled. You don't have to try so hard, Naruko Uzumaki. You already have my approval as Haru's mother. Really? Naruko's eyes widened, and Yasaka nodded. Hell yeah. Databane. I can't wait to rub it in Sakura and Ino's faces. Naruko cheered. Catelyn and Sansa exchanged nervous glances before looking back at Yasaka. I take it we don't have your approval. Catelyn ventured. Not quite yet, Yasaka said honestly. But with proper training and lessons from me personally, I believe we can get there. You both should have plenty of time for that, after all. She turned to Naruko and asked, how long will it take for the Leaf Ninjas to deploy and clear out the north, and make it safe again? Deploy? They can set out tomorrow, Naruko said. As for how long to clear out the north, we're pretty fast on our feet, but a lot of Leaf Ninjas aren't used to snow, so that'll slow them down a bit. Not to mention, the north is almost as big as the entire elemental nations. It might take around 2 weeks to hunt down every Bolton supporter and all his allied houses. Only 2 weeks? Sansa asked in shock. I was expecting it to take months, maybe even a year. Magic is truly amazing. It's actually chakra they use, Yasaka corrected Sansa. That's something you and your mother will be learning in our lessons, along with how to live in a more modern world. You two will be staying with me in my palace in the meantime. I know you both probably want to hang around my son more, but he does have a restaurant to run. We understand, Catelyn answered for them. The heavy conversation was brought to a temporary halt as Haru and Kunu walked over with a tray full of homemade hot fudge sundaes. Kunu was already halfway through her own ice cream treat, chocolate stains smudged across her cheeks. We made ice cream. I helped mix it, Kunu said proudly. Yasaka smiled warmly at her daughter. Good job, sweetie. She leaned forward and took her bowl as Haru set down bowls in front of everyone else. Yasaka took a spoonful and sighed contentedly. So good. Catelyn and Sansa hesitated at first but soon started digging in. It's so cold but so tasty, Catelyn said, her eyes wide with surprise. Sansa nodded in agreement, taking another small bite. I've never had anything like this before. It's amazing. Naruko, however, was the real shocker. Before anyone had even finished their first few bites, her bowl was already empty. She held it out to Haru, her cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. More, please. Yasaka blinked. Didn't he just set that down in front of her a few seconds ago? Maybe Yasaka would need to spend some time with Naruko as well, if only to teach her a few proper dining manners, especially since she declared herself a princess as well. Chapter 30, Pork Part 1, Haru. Tanya was slumped over the counter, letting out a huff like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She looked troubled about something. Is something wrong, Tanya-chan? I asked her. It's your sister's birthday tomorrow, and as her loyal employee and bestest friend, aren't I supposed to get her a gift? What do I get for a yokai princess who already has everything she could ask for, she said. Apparently, Victoria had been out in Kyoto trying to find something too but was having no luck either. Rich people problems, Alice said with a small smile from her spot at the counter. Alice had spent the entire previous day with Rias and looked much better after their spa day. She was back at her post as the guard of my restaurant, at least until the door decided to open back up to her world. No luck yet on that front. I nodded at Tanya. I know how you feel. I usually just make her an elaborate feast. This year, I was thinking of making the theme pork. Tanya tilted her head, considering. Maybe I could help. I've never hunted before, but maybe one of the dimensions has some exotic ingredients I could hunt. I ran a hand through my blonde hair. That's actually not a bad idea. Although, I'm pretty sure the boars in Skyrim and Ain's world are the same as we have here. Same with Harry's world, and I'd rather not experiment with alien meat either. We need somewhere new. As if on cue, 2 white badges dropped down on the counter. They were circular and had the numbers 407 and 408 printed on them. I think the goddess is helping us out, I said, picking up the badge marked 407 and handing 408 to Tanya. I walked around the counter, heading for the door, but paused. Alice, want to come with us? No thanks, have fun hunting pigs on your own. I just spent an entire day in a hot spring after months in a zombie apocalypse. I'd rather not get filthy again so soon. I'll just hang out with Henry when she shows up. That girl is adorable, Alice replied. Thanks for watching the restaurant for me, I said, heading out with Tanya following close behind. Before we even reached the door, it flew open, and Naruto strolled in, her eyes immediately landing on us. Oh, hi Haru. Are you heading out? I just stopped by to visit. Yeah, it's Kuna's birthday tomorrow, and we're going to hunt some exotic pork for her birthday feast, wanna come? I asked. Before she could respond, another badge appeared out of thin air. Naruto deftly caught it, reading the number 409 printed on it. Pork is my favorite. I definitely want to help. Naruto grinned. This can be like our mini date before our actual date. And then you have to take Alice-chan over there out next. You can't just bring in 2 other women when she was here first. Alice choked on her coffee, coughing as her face turned bright red. Haru is handsome and all, and I'm very grateful to him, but I'm not ready for anything like that, yet. Naruto gave Alice a baffled look before shrugging and grabbing my arm. Let's go, Haru. We've got pigs to hunt. She started dragging me toward the door, Tanya trailing behind us with an amused expression. When we stepped through the door, I immediately noticed how dark it was. We were in a pitch-black tunnel, and stairs stretched out in front of us. My night vision made it easy for me to see, but Naruto and Tanya weren't so lucky. This is ridiculous. I can't see a damn thing, Naruto grumbled, waving her hand in front of her face like it would help. Agreed, Tanya muttered while squinting. This is inconvenient. I sighed and grabbed both of their wrists, pulling them along. Stick close. I can see just fine. As we climbed the stairs, I heard a man up ahead, clawing at a steel door. He was panicking, slamming his fists against the metal like it owed him money. Please, no. I was so close. Open up. Please, I need to pass the hunter's exam, the man begged, his voice full of desperation. Need some help? I called out, leading Naruto and Tanya closer to him. The man whipped around, startled. Who's there? Did you just get here too? The proctor closed the door on me right as I reached the top. That damn mouthless asshole. Mouthless. I shook my head. That sounded weird, but I'd heard stranger things. Placing my hand on the steel door. The goddess had sent us here for a reason, and I doubted there were any pigs hiding behind this tunnel. My blue foxfire ignited, and the thick steel began to rapidly melt under my palm. What the hell? Holy fucking shit, the man exclaimed, stumbling back as the heat radiated from the door. Naruto whistled, clearly impressed. Not bad, Haru-kun. Can you do this for all locked doors? Asking for future reference in case I want to steal some shit, of course. Tanya just crossed her arms, looking more annoyed than anything. This feels excessive, but I suppose it works. I smirked, focusing on creating a large enough hole. Once the steel blob melted away, sunlight poured in, revealing a large group of people on the other side. All of them were staring at us in sheer disbelief, their expressions somewhere between awe and terror. Thank you so much, the panicked man shouted, darting through the hole and carefully avoiding the molten edges. I stepped through after him, with Naruto and Tanya close behind. The large group of people on the other side didn't move. They just stood there, gawking at us. I scratched my cheek, feeling a little awkward under their stares. Sorry about that. The door closed on us. I glanced around and noticed that all of them were wearing numbered badges identical to the ones we had. My tails swayed behind me as I walked toward the colorful group of people. There were so many of them, and they all looked like they came from completely different places. 2 kids near the front immediately spotted Tanya and ran up to her. They seemed around her size, which wasn't saying much given her unique situation. "Hi there. My name's Gon, and this is Killua," said the one with spiky black hair and a big grin. "We didn't see any other kids here. Where did you come from?" Killua, the one with silver hair and a more suspicious vibe, glanced at me nervously. "And how did your friend over there melt through those thick steel doors so fast? And why does he have tails?" he asked Tanya. Tanya crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed with the 2 kids. "I'm Tanya, and I came from the other side of that door." "Obviously." Killua smirked. "You're funny. You should come hang out with us instead of the boring adults." "Yeah. Come on." Gon added enthusiastically, grabbing her hand. Tanya turned to me with a look that screamed help me. "Haru." I couldn't resist messing with her. "Have fun, Tanya. Go play with your new friends." Her glare promised payback, but before she could argue, the boys were already dragging her off, chatting her ears off about who knows what. Naruto giggled and hooked her arm through mine as we made our way to the front of the crowd. "That was mean, Haru-kun." "I'm sure she'll be fine," I said with a grin. At the front, a man with no mouth, seriously, no mouth, was staring at us nervously. The other guy from before hadn't been exaggerating about him. "Something wrong, buddy?" I asked innocently, as if I'd totally been part of this group all along. The faceless man glanced at the badges on Naruto's and my chests before shrugging. "Nothing is wrong, I suppose. My name is Saditz, and welcome to the hunter exam." "An exam to test out people's qualities as hunters?" That was great. No wonder the goddess sent us here. I was sure we'd find some good pigs during this test. Saditz turned and addressed the rest of the crowd. "The first exam is still not yet over. Follow me to the next phase. We'll be passing through the Swindler's Swamp. Be sure to stay close to me. If you get lost, you may never find your way out. The swamp is full of poisonous plants and dangerous creatures that will try to trick you and eat you." Naruto tightened her grip on my arm as the group started moving. "This place reminds me of Training Ground 44, she muttered. "I hated that place so much. There were centipedes there bigger than me. And they spat acid too, because why the fuck wouldn't they?" Naruto clung a little tighter to my arm, muttering about giant centipedes and acid, and I couldn't help but chuckle. "You're afraid of bugs? After everything you've faced?" "They're gross, okay," she shot back, pouting. "And they always come out of nowhere." We followed Saditz through the swamp, the air getting heavier with each step. A lot of the other examinees were starting to lag behind. They looked exhausted, like they'd been running marathons for hours. Some of them smelled like it too, which made my nose twitch. Super smell was great most of the time, but moments like this made it a curse. I noticed a man jogging closer to us, his aura practically dripping with murderous intent. He was wearing clown makeup and a ridiculously colorful outfit that made him look like he'd just escaped a circus. As he got closer, he smiled in a way that wasn't comforting at all. "Hello there. I don't remember seeing you two when the hunter exam started. I definitely would have noticed people as powerful as you. Your little blonde friend too." He shuddered and, to my disgust, licked his lips. Naruto stiffened and muttered under her breath, "Fuck me, it's another Orochimaru." I had to admit, I was getting similar vibes. I kept my expression calm. "You should probably stay away from Tanya." The clown raised an eyebrow. "Oh. And why would I do that? She looks so tantalizing." He smirked, giving both of us a once-over. As do both of you. Your funeral, I said with a shrug. Oh. He leaned closer, his bloodlust spiking so sharply that several nearby examinees fled, no matter how tired they were. Even Sadits picked up his pace. Clearly not wanting to deal with this guy. Are you going to kill me for going near the innocent little girl? I love a good fight. I chuckled softly. No, I'm not going to kill you. Tanya-chan will take care of that herself. I never got her exact body count, but it's easily in the tens of thousands. Maybe even close to 100,000. The clown froze mid-step, his expression faltering. Naruto gaped at me. Holy shit, Tanya is scary. I know she basically one-shot a dragon, but what the fuck was wrong with her homeland if a little girl has a body count that high? It's a whole thing. She doesn't really like to talk about it, I mumbled, scratching the back of my head. I glanced back at the clown, but he was gone. I shrugged and sniffed the air, picking up Sadit's scent trail. Come on, let's catch up. Naruto nodded, still muttering about Tanya's insane kill count. We sped up, weaving through the swamp. Tanya was fine, I was sure of it. She had those two boys with her, and if she somehow got lost, she could always just fly above the trees to find us. No big deal. Probably, Tanya was not happy. She was dripping with frog mucus after the largest amphibian she had ever seen, about the size of a building, tried to swallow her and the two dumb boys she was stuck with. Her mood was about as bad as her current smell. Ha ha ha, that was a close one, Gon said, rubbing the back of his head. Why'd it spit us out? I gave it some of this poison juice Tampa gave me, Killua said nonchalantly. Tanya narrowed her eyes at him. Why do you have poison juice? Killua shrugged. You'd know if you guys had been here at the start of the exam instead of sneaking in halfway through. We did no such thing, Tanya snapped, crossing her arms even though she knew neither of them believed her. Gon and Killua seemed unbothered by the entire ordeal, but Tanya was sticky, smelly, and furious. She grabbed the rifle hanging off her shoulder, spun around, and pointed it at the giant frog that was waddling away. What are you doing? Killua started, but his words were cut off as a glowing magic circle appeared in front of Tanya's rifle barrel. She pulled the trigger, and a deafening boom echoed through the swamp. The giant frog's head was blown clean off in an instant. The ground trembled as its headless body collapsed with a sickening thud. Gon stared at her in awe. Tanya-chan, you're really scary. What the hell? Killua exclaimed, his silver hair sticking up as if the blast had shocked him. How does a regular rifle do that kind of damage? And what was that glowing circle? That looked like something out of a video game my brother plays. Tanya scoffed. That was magic. I used a spell to increase the velocity of the explosive bullet and amplify the power of the explosion. Magic is real. Gon's eyes lit up with excitement. Can you teach me? Tanya let out an exasperated sigh. Are you any good at math? Gon blinked. I've never been to school. Me neither, Killua added, as if that was something to be proud of. Tanya rolled her eyes. My magic requires precise calculations. You'd need at least a college-level education to even begin learning it. Then how do you know it? Killua asked suspiciously. You look younger than we do. I'm 13. Tanya declared, pouting. And I'm a genius. I didn't need school. Killua muttered something about it being unfair, and Gon's shoulders slumped. Math ruins everything, he grumbled. Whatever. We need to catch up with the group before we fall too far behind, Tanya said. She started floating a few feet off the ground, leaving a shocked Gon and Killua gaping at her. You can fly. Gon shouted, his earlier disappointment completely forgotten. Tanya smirked. Try to keep up, or you'll fail this ridiculous test. Killua muttered something about flying being unfair, but he and Gon quickly sprinted after her as she floated gracefully through the swamp. Sadits, Satas arrived at the site of the second exam faster than he should have. He needed to warn the second stage examiners. Hey there, Satas. Menchi called out, leaning casually against a table piled with cooking supplies. You look like you've seen a ghost or something. Want some cookies? Bahara added, shoveling another heaping handful of food into his mouth. Crumbs spilled down his shirt as he continued eating like he was preparing to hibernate or something. Satas shook his head. No, thank you, he said briskly, trying not to grimace at Bahara's gluttonous display. He straightened his tie again, a habit when he was anxious. I came here to warn you too. 3 very powerful beings somehow joined the exam halfway through my stage. Menchi frowned, her sharp eyes narrowing. Powerful how? Every single one of them. Satas hesitated, glancing around as though the trio might appear out of nowhere. He lowered his voice. Every single one of them reminds me of the chairman. Bahara immediately stopped chewing mid-bite, and Menchi's usually confident posture stiffened. There was no need to explain further. The chairman was regarded as one of the most invincible nin users in the world. If even one person comparable to him was in the exam, it would be cause for alarm. But 3. You're sure about this? Menchi asked, her tone serious now. I've never been more sure of anything, Satas replied. The danger I felt from them, it's bigger than anything I've ever sensed from the old man. Bahara swallowed his mouthful of food with an audible gulp. That's not great. Menchi crossed her arms and leaned against the table again, her usual confidence creeping back into her expression. Well, thanks for the warning, but neither Bahara nor I plan to make this exam about fighting. We're gourmet hunters, after all. Exactly, Bahara chimed in, his nerves easing slightly at the familiar thought of food. If they can't cook, they fail. End of story. Menchi smirked and punched her palm for emphasis. No matter how powerful they are, if their cooking sucks, I'll kick them to the curb without a second thought. Haru, Naruto and I were almost to the second exam site when I stopped dead in my tracks, frozen. A strange tingle ran down my spine, and the fur on my tails puffed out like I'd just been hit by electricity. What's wrong, Haru? Naruto asked, her bright purple eyes wide with concern. I turned to her, my face serious as I declared, I feel it. My pride as a chef is suddenly on the line. Someone out there dares to challenge me. Naruto blinked at me, her expression shifting from worried to amused. Okay, she said, letting out a small chuckle. Well, I guess you better show them who's boss then. I nodded firmly, the fire of determination already lighting in my chest. Indeed, I will. No one questions my culinary talents and gets away with it. Chapter 31, Pork Part 2, Haru, Naruto and I finally reached the end of the first exam stage. A small crowd had already gathered, made up of participants who'd arrived ahead of us. Most of them looked exhausted, sprawled on the ground or leaning against trees, trying to catch their breath. Naruto glanced around, frowning. Tanya's not here yet. She'll be fine, I said, leaning casually against a tree. She'll probably show up at the last second after maybe killing that creepy clown guy. Naruto blinked and then nodded. That probably makes sense. She paused for a moment, her frown fading into something more thoughtful. Still. I can't believe Tanya has such a high body count. Even my old man only killed, like, 2,000 or 3,000 people. I gaped at her. Completely thrown by how casually she said that. A few of the other participants nearby overheard her and immediately took several steps back, giving us a wide berth. I caught a glance from one guy who was covered in needles, he looked way too interested in Naruto all of a sudden. I made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Naruto didn't seem to notice the commotion she'd caused. She just plopped down under a shady tree and grabbed one of my tails to use as a cushion. I sighed but let her. At least she wasn't yanking on it like Kunu usually did. While we waited, The silver-haired kid from earlier showed up, walking out of the forest like it was no big deal. I waved him over. Hey, where's Tanya? And that other kid? Gone, right? Killua, yeah, I remembered his name now, shoved his hands into his pockets and shrugged. They stayed behind to fight Hisoka. Is Hisoka the clown guy? I asked, already knowing the answer. Killua nodded, looking entirely too nonchalant about it. I turned to Naruto with a smug look. Told you. She'll be here right at the end. Naruto giggled, leaning back against my tail. You must really know Tanya well. I shrugged. She's almost part of the family at this point. She even has the hair blonde for it. Surprisingly, Hisoka showed up first, carrying another contestant who looked like they'd gone 10 rounds with a bear and lost. The guy was out cold, head lolling against Hisoka's shoulder. But what really caught everyone's attention was Hisoka himself. His outfit was half shredded, scorched, and smeared with soot. Parts of his skin were raw and blistered. The sight made the whole crowd go quiet. People started whispering, their voices blending into a confused hum. Who could have done that to Hisoka? One of them murmured. The clown's eyes scanned the group, lingering on me and Naruto. I couldn't help it, I smirked. Hisoka's face twisted into a pout, and he quickly looked away. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. The guy had obviously bitten off more than he could chew when it came to Tanya's explosive magic. He was lucky to still be breathing. A few minutes later, Tanya showed up with Gon and some other blonde guy in tow. Gon immediately bolted off to join Killua, while Tanya stomped toward me, her small frame radiating fury. Naruto was still curled up on my tail, making herself comfortable. I nudged her. Come on, Naruto. Time to be social. She pouted at me as I pulled her to her feet. You're no fun, Haru. Hey there, Tanya, I said, then immediately recoiled, covering my nose. Ugh, what the hell happened to you? You stink. Her glare was deadly, and before I could react, a sharp pain shot through my shin. Ow! I yelped, hopping on one foot. Did you reinforce that kick with magic? I got eaten by a freaking frog. Tanya snapped, crossing her arms. A frog the size of your entire restaurant, Haru. And in case you're wondering, I blew its head clean off. Naruto doubled over laughing. You got eaten by a frog? That's priceless. Tanya spun toward her, aiming another kick, but Naruto was faster, darting behind me for cover. I couldn't help laughing, even as Tanya fumed. Turning my attention to the blonde guy, I held out a hand. Name's Haru. You must be one of Tanya's new friends. He hesitated, then shook my hand. I'm Kurapika. Are you her big brother? She really saved us from Hisoka back there, but... He paused, frowning. Her gun is terrifying. Should a little girl really be walking around with something more powerful than a cannon? I grinned at him. If you're so worried about it, you can try taking her weapons away. Kurapika blinked. Wait, weapons? As in more than one? Oh, yeah, I said with a laugh. She's probably got 2 or 3 sidearms under her clothes right now. Tanya's always strapped head to toe. I chuckled to myself. Watching people realize how much of a walking arsenal Tanya never got old. Kurapika gave Tanya a wary glance, like he wasn't sure if he should thank her again or start running. Tanya just rolled her eyes. Don't worry, she said flatly. I only use them on idiots who deserve it. That didn't seem to reassure him much. A sudden commotion drew everyone's attention to the front of the group. A woman stood there with a confident stance, her strange hairstyle making her stand out. But it wasn't just her, there was a guy next to her who looked even stranger. Wow, he makes members of the Akimichi clan look healthy, Naruto said with a chuckle. I nodded in agreement. That guy was big. The woman cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Listen up, everyone. My name is Menchi, and this is my partner Buhara. We're the proctors for the second stage of the hunter exam. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the kicker. This portion of the exam will be cooking. The crowd erupted into mutters and groans. What kind of test is this? Someone grumbled. Cooking. That's a woman's job, another yelled. No real man who wants to be a hunter would waste his time with garbage like that. Menchi's eyes narrowed, her glare promising pain. But before she could act, I felt one of my tails lash out on instinct. It smashed the loudmouth so hard into the ground that a small crater formed under him. Dust and debris puffed into the air, and everyone nearby backed away like I just sprouted an extra head. I let my tail sway behind me menacingly. I'll have you all know I'm a professional chef. I even own my own restaurant. Does anyone else feel like insulting cooking in my presence? My voice was calm, but the menace was impossible to miss. Naruto leaned toward Tanya and whispered loud enough for me to hear. What a bunch of morons. Tanya nodded in agreement. Menchi glanced at me, a spark of approval in her eyes. Well said, guy with all the tails. Cooking is a noble profession. And in case any of you didn't know, some of the ingredients in this world are so dangerous they'll kill you before you even get them into a pot. She folded her arms and smirked at the group. With that said, we're wasting time. Buhara and I are hungry. Aha! Buhara chimed in, his deep voice rumbling. The thing I want to eat most is pork. Menchi grinned. You heard him. Go out into the forest, hunt some pigs, bring them back, and start cooking. A few contestants looked like they were about to complain, but then their eyes flicked to my still swaying tails. They wisely kept their mouths shut and started moving. Pork, huh? Naruto said, tilting her head. Now that's a coincidence. This is perfect. Tanya added. We can save a few pigs for Kuna's party tomorrow. If these pigs are anything like that giant frog, they're going to be huge. That's true, I said, nodding. Then I looked at them. How about you two go hunting for the three of us? I want to have a word with Menchi. I need to see if she's got the qualifications to judge my cooking. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You're really going to check the proctor? That's bold, Haru. My pride as a chef won't allow for anything less, I said with a grin. Tanya rolled her eyes but nodded. Fine. We'll bag the best pigs out there. Don't take too long, though. We'll need you to cook them. The two of them disappeared into the forest, leaving me with Buhara and Menchi. I strode up to her, folding my arms. So, Menchi, I began, you're a chef. She raised an eyebrow. One of the best. Why? Because I'm not about to take culinary criticism from someone who doesn't know their way around a kitchen. Cooking is my life. If you're going to judge my food, you'd better have the skills to back it up. I said challengingly. I like your attitude, Menchi said, her eyes locking onto mine. You want to test me? Fine. While everyone else is out getting their pigs, you and I will have a little showdown. Let's see who can make the best sushi. Menchi. Buhara said, looking confused. We don't have any fish for sushi. Menchi let out a frustrated sigh, crossing her arms. No problem, I said. I opened a portal beside me, reaching in without hesitation. When I pulled my hand back out, I was holding two large yellowfin tuna. I handed one to Menchi, keeping the other for myself. Menchi stared at the fish in surprise. What kind of ability is this? She asked. This fish is fresh, and it's still cold. Nen? I repeated, tilting my head. I don't know what that is. Menchi frowned but didn't press the issue. Whatever it is, it's impressive, she said, holding the tuna tightly. The cooking stations nearby were set up with everything we needed. Menchi and I each took a station and got to work. I pulled out one of my best knives and started preparing the tuna. The blade moved smoothly through the fish as I cut away the head, fins, and tail. I carefully removed the skin, revealing the deep red meat underneath. I worked quickly but carefully, slicing the tuna into perfect portions for sushi. While I focused on the tuna, one of my tails detached and transformed into a clone of me. The clone immediately began preparing the rice, rinsing it in a bowl until the water ran clear. Menchi stopped mid-slice to stare at the clone. "What is that? That's not fair." I glanced at her. "All's fair in cooking," I said simply. My clone finished washing the rice and placed it in a pot to cook. It measured the water and added just the right amount of seasoning before setting it to steam. Meanwhile, I continued working on the fish, seasoning the tuna lightly with sea salt, soy sauce, and a touch of lemon. Once the rice was ready, my clone started folding the seaweed wraps, making sure each sheet was smooth and unbroken. Menchi was working hard, but it was clear that she was struggling to keep up. Her movements were sharp, but she wasn't as fast or as precise. "Having trouble?" I asked teasingly. She shot me a glare but didn't answer. I finished plating my sushi first, arranging the pieces neatly on the plate. The vibrant colors of the tuna, rice, and seaweed made it look beyond appetizing. I made enough for Menchi and Bahara, making sure to give Bahara an extra-large portion. Menchi finished her sushi a couple of minutes later. She placed her plate next to mine, looking tense. Bahara's eyes lit up as he looked at the food. "This looks amazing," he said, leaning closer to my plate. Menchi frowned at him. "At least act like you're excited for my cooking too," she muttered. We started the tasting with my sushi. Menchi picked up a piece and took a bite. Her expression changed immediately. She closed her eyes and chewed slowly, her shoulders relaxing. "This is really good," she admitted quietly. Bahara grabbed a piece and stuffed it into his mouth. His face lit up, and tears started running down his cheeks as he continued eating. I tasted her sushi in return. It was good, better than most, but it wasn't on the same level as mine. I smiled at her, letting my tails sway behind me as I waited for her to admit it. Menchi put her chopsticks down and sighed. Saditz was right. "You're a monster. A monster of a chef," she said. She looked at me seriously. "I am not worthy to judge someone of your skill. You immediately passed the second exam, master." "Oh, right," I said, realizing I'd almost forgotten this was part of the hunter exam. Menchi groaned. "I thought this test would intimidate people, not make me look bad." "Thanks for that." I shrugged. "Maybe don't challenge a professional chef next time." "I'm a professional chef too." She grumbled before asking me if I wanted to be a judge for the second exam as well. I couldn't keep the mischievous grin off of my face. That sounded fun. The other contestants started returning from the forest, all carrying pigs. And not just any pigs, massive pigs. Each of these animals had to weigh at least a ton, but these humans carried them over their heads like it was nothing. I couldn't help but grin. Kuna was going to lose her mind when she saw how much meat we were bringing back for her birthday feast. Then I noticed Naruto's clones. At least 10 of them were making their way toward me, each carrying a pig. The moment they reached my feet, they dropped the carcasses in a neat pile and vanished in a puff of smoke. "More clones!" Menchi exclaimed. She turned to me with an incredulous look. "Why didn't I think of that for my ability? That would be so useful in the kitchen." Bahara patted her head with his massive hand. There, Menchi," he said gently. The real Naruto strolled over with Tanya, a smirk plastered on her face. "All right, Haru. Get to cooking." "Nope," I said casually, leaning back in my seat. Naruto blinked. "Huh? What do you mean, no?" Menchi answered before I could. She stood up, raised her voice, and declared loudly, "Haru has already passed the second stage of the hunter exam. He's going to help judge the rest of you instead." A chorus of complaints erupted from the contestants. "That's favoritism. He didn't even do the pig hunting part. The pretty fox boy is cheating." I turned toward the complainers, letting a small amount of my yuki leak out. It wasn't much, just enough to get their attention. Their hair stood on end, their eyes went wide, and I could hear some of them gulping audibly. "Any other issues?" I asked, keeping my tone even. They all immediately shook their heads, apologized, and hurried back to their cooking stations. Naruto frowned, crossing her arms. "I suck at cooking, Haru. I always left that stuff to Naruto or Sakura on missions." Tanya shrugged. "Who cares if we pass the exam or not? We already got the pigs. That's what we came here for." Menchi turned to us, her mouth slightly open in shock. "Wait, you three came to the hunter exam for the pigs? You don't even want to be hunters?" I shrugged. "I'm not even really sure what a hunter is at this point," I admitted. "And yeah, it's my little sister's birthday tomorrow, so I can't stick around after tonight. We came here to get pork for her party." Menchi lowered her finger, clearly at a loss for words. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue but then closed it again, apparently deciding against it. "I can't believe this," she muttered under her breath, sitting back down. The contestants began bringing over their cooked pork dishes one by one. I was sitting at the judging table next to Menchi and Bahara, ready to see what they'd come up with. I wasn't expecting much. Still, this part might be entertaining if nothing else. Naruto was the first to step up. She set her plate down with a grin, looking way too proud of herself. "What did you make?" I asked, eyeing the dish suspiciously. "A pork sandwich," she announced. I leaned closer, sniffing it. My nose wrinkled immediately. The bread smelled fine, but the meat. I grabbed the sandwich, ripped it in half, and saw the blackened chunks of pork inside. "You torched the meat," I said flatly. Then, without hesitation, I tossed the entire thing into the garbage can beside me. Naruto's jaw dropped. "Hey! That took me forever." "And you still burned it," I said, shaking my head. "Fail." She stormed off, muttering something about how she wasn't a chef. Tanya stepped up next, carrying a small tray in both hands. I looked at the grayish cube on her tray and frowned. "What the hell is this, Tanya?" She sighed. "Emergency field rations. I'm not a cook, Haru. I made do with what I had." I picked up the cube, inspecting it. It smelled like pork, but there were other ingredients mixed in that I couldn't quite identify. The texture felt dense and unappetizing, but I took a bite anyway. It tasted awful. Sure, it was probably nutritious, but it had the consistency of rubber and the flavor of disappointment. I chewed slowly, trying not to laugh, but I couldn't hold it in. "This is terrible," I said, shaking my head as I set the rest of the cube down. "Fail." Tanya just shrugged and walked over to sit next to Naruto, who was already sulking. The next group of contestants came up together, Gon, Killua, and Kurapika. Each of them carried a massive whole roasted pig on a platter. I stared at the pigs as they set them down in front of me. "You roasted the entire thing?" "Yeah," Gon said with a big smile. "It's how they do it in the wild." I poked at the seared skin with my fork, then cut into the meat underneath. As I suspected, it was raw. "You know this kind of thing takes hours, right?" "You've only had 30 minutes, I said, looking at all three of them. Killua shrugged. "It looked cool, though." "Cool isn't edible," I said. Kurapika sighed. "So we fail?" "Obviously," I said, tossing my fork onto the plate. Despite their failure, Bahara didn't hesitate to dig into the massive pigs. He tore chunks of meat from the bones and ate them raw, skin, bones, and all. I couldn't help but watch in a mix of awe and horror. Menchi leaned over and whispered, "Yeah, Bahara will literally eat anything." "That much is obvious," I muttered, shaking my head. Kurapika, Gon, and Killua went to join Naruto and Tanya in the loser's corner. I could hear them all grumbling with each other. One by one, the rest of the contestants brought up their dishes. The pattern was clear: burnt, undercooked, overseasoned, or just plain bad. Menchi and I shot down dish after dish, while Bahara happily stuffed his face with whatever he could get his hands on.